Good morning and welcome to Birmingham, even if it's a virtual welcome to Birmingham. It's my honour to open our International Local Leaders Net Zero Summit. Now, what today is all about is thinking about the local contribution to the global challenge of the climate emergency. Over the last few years, we've seen lots of local authorities and indeed combined authorities across the country and indeed around the world declaring their climate emergency, getting on with their plans for carbon neutrality by whatever date, in our own case, 2041. Great work, and I'm sure we're going to hear lots of wonderful examples from across the country as the morning goes on. But what today's really saying is let's advance beyond that, where we're all working in our own area with a national target as well set by the government to bring the two together in a spirit of partnership between central government and local leaders. And to get behind that partnership, we've come together to issue our communique, which has got 6 big asks and offers in it. Critical point, we make an offer and we ask the government to help us in delivering those things. The 6 that we've talked about, which will be the focus of our summit through the course of the day. First of all, decarbonising transport. Secondly, decarbonising our homes and commercial buildings. Thirdly, thinking about energy generation, storage and systems management. Thinking about the natural environment, thinking about finance to deliver all this change. And then, of course, the powers bestowed on local leaders to deliver. So, that's the national picture. Everyone will talk about their part of it, and I should, like everyone else, just say a little bit about the West Midlands. Because in a sense, we are the epitome of this challenge and indeed opportunity. As the home of the first industrial revolution, you could say it was the West Midlands, all back to Ironbridge, that was responsible for the challenge that the world now faces. But we're now stepping up to that challenge with the decarbonisation of our transport, thinking about our housing stock, but also some unique opportunities here. This is the region of the country that can claim to be the home of the green industrial revolution. We're seeing our low carbon manufacturing sector growing faster than any other sector, with huge job opportunities in that sector coming forward. And we're also suggesting to government, because of our strength in energy management, storage and systems, that we could be the pathfinder for an energy devolution deal. So the message is there's something special in the West Midlands, but beyond that, and it's why I wanted to bring colleagues from around the country together, I want to say today, it's local authorities, mayors who convene their places and then contract with government to deliver on behalf of all our citizens against the biggest challenge the world faces now. So that's our picture. Next, I'm very pleased to introduce my co-host for the morning, Polly Billingham, who is the CEO of UK 100, which, as we know, is the networking organisation for local leaders. Polly, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy. And it's really great to hear this in the context of one particular place, the West Midlands. But of course, we have so many local leaders convening today who are behind the joint statement that we are sending to ministers. As Andy says, this is a joint statement and in some ways an open letter, because what we want to do is to offer local authorities as the partners of choice for government on this. We're proposing a new enhanced partnership to accelerate the transition to net zero, to drive economic recovery through growth in green jobs and skills, and to support the UK's international position as a net zero pioneer, particularly important, of course, in the year of COP26 being held in Glasgow. We have 6 asks, and those in more detail. The UK Infrastructure Bank should be prioritising net zero local investment. We need to reduce costs to create a seamless electric vehicle charging network across the UK. A long-term plan to support local authorities to decarbonise homes and buildings. We need to establish strategic energy bodies with a mandate to reach net zero. We'd like to see a target to reverse nature decline in the Environment Bill. And the powers and regulations that we're looking for, regulatory frameworks we're looking for, should be wrapped up in a net zero local powers bill so that we can empower, enable, enforce and oblige local climate action across the UK. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to remind everybody that we've got a whole range of contributors today. We've got more than 30 people have signed up to the communique, and a significant one in that is, of course, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. I'm delighted that Sadiq is able to join us today. Of course, London sits in a different kind of network across the globe, having been the founding member of the C40. So they can spend their time talking to Vancouver and Seattle and Seoul, whereas we are making sure that Swindon and Sunderland talk to each other as well. It's fantastic that we've got you here, Sadiq. Can you tell us why this communique is important for you, bearing in mind London's global reach?
Well, good morning. It's fantastic to join you all. Can I begin by just paying tribute to UK 100 and the West Midlands Mayor Andy Street for hosting this important summit and for their leadership on this issue. I also want to begin by thanking you, Polly, my good friend, the Chief Executive of UK 100, for chairing the event today and for your tireless campaigning and efforts to promote ambitious climate policies. It is great to see so many local and regional leaders from different political parties coming together for this summit. And I welcome later on the Secretary of State's contribution and comments in this important initiative. Thank you, Kwasi, for being here this morning. In the run-up to COP26 later this year, I believe it's vitally important that we work cross-party, central government, regional and local government, public sector and private sector, to build as much of a consensus as possible about the bold action that's required to tackle the climate emergency. Not only because we want COP26 to be a huge success for our country, with the UK playing a leading role in coordinating global climate action, but because the fate of our environment, our planet, and our shared future really is hanging in the balance. And it's in all of our interests to avert a catastrophic climate crisis. In London, we know what's at stake, and we're determined to meet this generational challenge. We're taking some of the boldest and most ambitious action of any major city in the world to tackle the deadly duo of climate change and toxic air pollution. We've launched the world's first ultra-low emission zone, which is helping to bring down emissions and clean up our air, reducing some of the most harmful forms of air pollution in central London by almost a half. We've set a target of making London a zero carbon city by 2030 and are working to make all of our buses either electric or hydrogen powered by the same year. And we've delivered a 5-fold increase in protected cycle lanes, making it easier and more attractive for Londoners to exchange 4 wheels for 2 as they move about our city. Despite the huge strides we've made, however, we recognise that the climate emergency is a problem that's far too big for any one city, region or country to solve alone. And so we're committed to building bridges with all those who share our goal of accelerating the transition to net zero. That's why I'm proud London is joining with UK 100 today in proposing a new and enhanced partnership with the government as we seek to fulfil our climate obligations and support a swift and sustainable national recovery from the pandemic. The reality is we all stand to benefit from upping our game and boosting investment in green infrastructure and technology. It's good for businesses and our economy, good for jobs and our environment, and good for the health and well-being of our communities. Just take London's hydrogen bus programme as one example. Not only is it helping to clean up our city's air and tackle the invisible killer that is air pollution, but it's supporting supply chains and livelihoods across the UK, from Northern Ireland, where the buses are manufactured, to Nottingham, where the gas cylinders are made, and Runcorn, where the hydrogen is produced. Indeed, what we've achieved in our city to date and the economic gains our climate policies have helped unlock in London and across the country illustrate the value of strong local authorities and regional government. And so I'd appeal to government to work with us and to empower us to go further with more devolution and funding, because rather than being adversaries, the truth is we stand ready and willing to be valuable allies in our shared mission to deliver a net zero United Kingdom. Thank you, Polly, and thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much, Sadiq. And it's a really good example of how connected we are as a country, that those decisions made in London can have impact and job opportunities and growth elsewhere in the country. I'd like to bring in next one of our important members of UK 100, because we have established a countryside climate network, reminding ourselves and everybody else that although the focus has been much on cities, we need to have those solutions in rural areas too. And the newly elected leader of Cambridgeshire County Council is Councillor Lucy Netsinger. Councillor Lucy Netsinger, could you explain to us a little bit about what you're doing in Cambridgeshire and why this communique is important for you as a rural authority who wants to be able to stand ready to be part of the net zero story?
Thank you so much, Polly. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited to be supporting the UK 100 pitch to government this morning and to be supporting this communique. It is so important for local government across the whole country to be speaking strongly for our commitment to tackle climate change. As a new leader in Cambridgeshire, I was elected in May on a really strong commitment to put tackling climate change at the heart of all of Cambridgeshire County Council's policies. But we're very much aware that we can work so much more effectively if we do that with the support of local government, of central government, and that central government working with local government is by far the most powerful way and the fastest way that we're going to be able to achieve what we need to achieve to get to net zero. One lesson from the COVID pandemic actually is just how effective local government and national government working together can be. And I think we need to learn lessons from how we work together successfully over the past 18 months, which have been really difficult and really challenging. But we have achieved things that I think under different circumstances we wouldn't have been able to. And I think we need to take the same level of integration and working together into tackling the climate emergency that we have done to tackling the COVID emergency. In terms of what we need to tackle in a rural community, many of the issues are in fact very similar, but there are additional challenges in working in rural areas. So the difficulty of decarbonising our housing stock is a huge issue in rural areas. We've been working really closely on a huge project at Swaffham Prior with the Swaffham Prior community on this. There are many rural areas where they're still dependent on oil for their heating. That's not only incredibly expensive, but also incredibly bad for the environment. But trying to get rural areas off oil is really challenging. So we're really excited with our district heating project where we're using ground source heating for a whole village. But the challenges of doing that are huge, and we really need central government to be supporting us with pioneer projects like the Swaffham Prior one that we have running in Cambridgeshire. Rural transport is also a massive challenge. We've had in Cambridgeshire there's been a climate commission for the Combined Authority who have produced incredible work looking at what we need to do in Cambridgeshire, but it has shown that in our area we are as individuals using more the climate costs in rural areas are much higher than they are in cities, and a huge amount of that is the difficulty of decarbonising rural transport, and that's something that we really need to make a huge priority. Looking at better bus networks, better public transport for rural areas is a massive priority, but it's not easy, and we will need central government support for that. Thanks, Polly. I think I'm running over time.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Councillor Netsinger. It's really helpful to get that perspective from rural communities which want to be able to be part of the solution and also know that they have some opportunities to be able to draw from that. I'd like to bring in Lord Dieben. Lord Dieben is the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, who have pointed out again and again that if local authorities are not given the powers to do this, we're simply not going to meet our targets. And so I'm really delighted that he's able to join us in this part of the summit, simply to outline some of the insights that you've brought from the committee, Lord Dieben, into why this needs to change and what the national government needs to do to enable that local climate action to become a reality.
Well, thank you. I'm entirely of the opinion that local government is an essential part of delivering the battle against climate change. And at the moment, we are not doing any of the things that we ought to do, because we've got local government on one hand, which is largely committed to very sensible policies to reach net zero, and the government, at the other hand, which has certainly got the right policies, not quite so much actual delivery, but quite the right policies. And delivery depends on the linking of those two. And I do think that, first of all, we should see that the Department of Local Government should have a central body which helps local authorities not only with resources, but with information. No wonder the Cumbrian County Council gave permission for a coal mine. There's nothing in the planning system. There's no advice. There's no way in which they could have drawn the government's views to take into account when making that decision. And it's true right across the board. Too many local authorities are having to paddle their own canoe, invent the wheel again, all those things which could so easily be done by central government involvement with them, helping them, passing on good practice and the like. But secondly, central government has got to use them, give them the powers and the resources to deliver what only they can deliver. In the recent disaster over the green grants for people improving their heating and making themselves less dependent on fossil fuels, the one bright spark was what was happening with the money given to local authorities, who are doing that job extremely well. And the government recognised that, gave them another 500 million. They passed this on, it went there it was. But the 500 million was there because they couldn't use it for the more direct system which they had in mind. Now, local authorities can play a much bigger part in those deliveries. And so it's information, it's help, it's resources, and it's sharing. Above all, this battle is going to be won by cooperation between central government, regional government, local government, right the way down to parish councils. Everybody has got to be involved in this, and we all need the resources which are necessary and applicable to the level of local government in which we are involved. And the Climate Change Committee is absolutely clear. Unless local government plays a very much bigger part in the battle which we are fighting, we're not going to win.
Thank you so much, Lord Dieben. That's a really powerful and important message. And of course, what's really important is that we've also got contributions from government today. And now we're going to go to hear from Alok Sharma, who is, of course, the COP president, the person who is coordinating all of that activity in Glasgow, and of course in the build-up to it, by doing all of that international diplomacy to make sure that those climate change negotiations are effective. I'm delighted that we've managed to get a message from Alok Sharma, which is now going to run ahead of us now.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you today, and thank you to the UK 100 and Andy Street for organising this event, and of course the West Midlands Combined Authority as a whole for all your work on climate, with your 5-year plan to drive down emissions, create green jobs and lead the green industrial revolution. Friends, the Paris Agreement is a treaty between countries, and to put it into effect, we need local government on board. And that is why cities and regions are vital to COP26, the critical United Nations climate conference that we are hosting in Glasgow in November. A city which was indeed chosen in part for its great commitment to sustainability. COP26 is widely recognised to be the most important climate conference for some years. And when the countries of the world signed the Paris Agreement, they committed to do all they could to limit global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees and closer to 1.5 degrees. Because the science shows limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees would avoid the worst effects of climate change. To keep that limit within reach, we must halve global emissions by 2030. And that means taking action now. And that is what makes COP26 so critical. It must be the moment that every country and every part of society embraces their responsibility to protect our precious planet. And to achieve this, as COP26 President, I'm pushing for action around 4 key goals. First, to put the world on a path to driving down emissions until they reach net zero by the middle of the century, and this is essential to keeping 1.5 degrees alive. So as well as pushing for emissions reductions, we are working to get the global transition moving faster in sectors such as power and transport. Our second goal is to protect people and nature from the impact of climate change, because our climate is already changing and it will continue to do so even as we reduce emissions. Third, we want to get finance flowing to climate action, both public finance and private finance. And fourth, we want to work together, and that includes getting businesses, regions, cities and local authorities behind our COP26 goals. And local action is absolutely vital. Generating over 70% of the world's carbon emissions, cities will determine whether we can achieve net zero. And action from cities and regions helps to build momentum behind the Paris Agreement, creating those conditions that national governments need to act. So ahead of COP26, we're urging all cities and regions to join the race to zero. This is the United Nations campaign that commits signatories to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest, and to short-term emissions reduction targets to take you there. Targets based on the science, so that net zero is not just some aspiration, but a clear plan. And I'm very proud to say that cities and councils from all over the United Kingdom have signed up. From Newcastle to Nottingham, from Cambridge to Cornwall, and of course, the West Midlands. We're also seeing fantastic practical action from local authorities across the country. And now, whether that is Lancaster City Council electrifying its vehicles, or Swansea retrofitting housing stock, or indeed tree planting in the West Midlands. And it's been a real pleasure to learn about the work going on around the UK at the meetings of the COP26 Mayors and Regions Advisory Council, which we've established to help COP reach every corner of the United Kingdom. And we want others to hear about it too. So there'll be a series of events in the run-up to COP to showcase and celebrate net zero work across the country, visited indeed by the electric bus, which is at your event today, as well as regional events during COP itself. And we encourage local authorities to hold their own climate events promoting local action as part of the Together for Our Planet campaign, which is drumming up support for climate action and for COP26 itself across the country. We're also publishing a toolkit for local authorities on how to get involved in COP26. And I urge UK local authorities to use it to encourage climate action around the country. Together, let's make COP26 a summit all of us in the United Kingdom are proud of, as we work together to build a cleaner, brighter future for all of us. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have a message like that from the COP president, and an acknowledgement of how important local climate action is. We'll be delving into that in more detail in the Chatham House section of the summit with ministers a little bit later. But Alok was talking so much about that COP26 summit, and of course one of the hosts of that in a sense is Glasgow City Council itself, and we have the leader of Glasgow City Council with us, Councillor Susan Aiken. Susan, you heard what Alok had to say. You'll have heard also what other leaders have said in this section of the summit. How important is it that we have all those tiers of government, including the devolved administrations in places like Scotland and local authorities, really being able to do what we can, and what those powers need to, how those powers need to change so that we can do more?
Morning, Polly, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks, as others have said, to Andy Street for organising today's event. It's really important, and what you talk about, the essential nature of having all levels of government, is absolutely at the core of this. It's absolutely crucial. It's interesting, Alok said there that the UK government wants to have local government on board. I would argue maybe it should be the other way round to a certain extent. It already is the other way round, that local government is already forging the path ahead in terms of delivery and action. What we need now is national governments, and I do deliberately say that in the plural, because the devolved governments, the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly Government are absolutely crucial on this, because a lot of the relationships between national government and local government are devolved, and the UK government is a supranational government as well as a national government for England. So this is a complex landscape, and so it's absolutely crucial that all layers of government are involved and are collaborating and and are really looking into what is the architecture that's required. What do we need to do? What power do we need to hand over? Do we need to get in the right place in order to do this quickly? Because I think we need to be clear that there isn't any time to waste on this. In Glasgow alone, we're looking at interventions with, we calculate upfront costs of around £30 billion. That's with our net zero carbon date of 2030, which is obviously quite a bit faster than certainly the national governments. That's a huge amount of investment across the next 8 or 9 years. And it's on an unparalleled scale and complexity of transition to net zero. And we know that it's not going to be delivered by government or governments alone. We need to mobilise the private sector. We need to find creative financial solutions. But we also need to recognise that if we do this right, the revenue savings from the net zero transition will ultimately outweigh the costs, no matter how big these costs are. This is an investment in the future. With all these billions and billions of pounds that we're going to have to spend to get to net zero, we can also make sure that every single one of those pounds delivers better jobs, better health, better well-being, better places, better quality of life and better life opportunities for all of our citizens in every city and in every community across the UK and its constituent nations. So there's a lot at stake here, but the big question is not how much is it going to cost us now, but how much more is it going to cost us in the future if we don't take action now, if we don't get the investment right, and if we don't get those powers and the architecture and the levers in the right place. And the message to national governments today has to be that cities, local authorities, municipalities are the right place. We know our places. We know already what we need to do to deliver that transition. We need the capacity and the levers and the resource from you to enable us to do it fast at the pace and scale that's required. Because equally, national governments have set their targets and they are going to rely on us at local government to deliver those. So this is a relationship that's in all of our interests, but most of all, it's in the interests of the citizens that we represent and ultimately of the planet, of everyone, of global citizens and the future of humanity. So that's what's at stake in Glasgow in November, and that's what's at stake in all of our communities and all of our local governments across the next decade.
Andy?
So Susan, thank you very much and good luck to you for what you're doing in Glasgow in November. It's my responsibility just to try to summarise what's been said. And it's always a lot easier to do that if there is a good degree of agreement, as we've just heard from all of our speakers. So I think there are just two really standout points for the summary. And the first one goes right back to the introductory remarks about this is all talking about partnership between each level of local government and indeed national government. And we've heard every speaker talk about that in different ways. And Sadiq made the very important point that this is about cross-party. This is not the preserve of any one political party to own. It goes well beyond that. And it's a pleasure to stand shoulder to shoulder with leaders from all parties this morning as we have made this case. And I've heard words like cooperation, sharing, allies, integration, shared vision. And Alok Sharma talked about exactly that as well. So we do seem to be united around the shared endeavour. And the second summary point that I heard is that this is really where lots of different political agendas aligned. Of course, the quote-unquote environmental agenda is front and centre of mind. But there's big links to the well-being agenda, the health agenda. There are links to the innovation agenda, thinking about Britain's future as a scientific superpower, you might almost say. And of course, ultimately, to jobs and economic prosperity. So this really is a sweet spot if we can all align behind it. Polly, back to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm aware that we want to go into private session quite soon, and therefore get into the kind of the meat of this conversation about not only the what, but also now the how of what we're looking for, and discuss that in more detail with government ministers. So I'll just leave with you with the opportunity to be able to watch our film, which summarises the communiqué, the statement, and the amount of commitment that we have secured across the country and why we're doing this. This is an environmental agenda. It's also an economic and a health and wellbeing agenda, as Andy said. So I'm hoping to join many of you very shortly in the private session. Those of you who have joined publicly, I hope you've been equally inspired. And if your local leaders are not signed up to this, go and get them signed up and watch the film now. Thank you.